Video number 4 of wonder. So I guess what I'd like you to think about when I'm reading this time is if you can put yourself in the shoes of somebody arriving in a school for the first time and everyone else at the school has already been there or are familiar with each other. Maybe they feel comfortable or confident, and what it would be like for you arriving for the first time in a middle school. So think about you'd be grade 6 and add another layer on top of that feeling of you have a facial deformity, so you know you look different and you're used to people not being comfortable looking at you. And then add another layer on that. This is the first time August has actually been to a real school. He's done something called homeschooling. And homeschooling is reasonably common. It's where parents and the parents of other children, they all get together and they teach their children. So sometimes it will be a little group and one parent will be the science teacher and one the maths. Maybe they live on a yacht or they live on a farm and they're homeschooled. So they get all the schooling materials sent to them or they somehow find it. There's various ways. But the children do not go to a traditional classroom school. So there's all these layers for him. So maybe think about what that would be like and put yourself in Augie's position as we read this bit. First day jitters. Okay, so I admit the first day of school, I was nervous that the butterflies in my stomach were more like pigeons flying around my insides. Mum and Dad were probably a little nervous too, but they acted all excited for me, taking pictures of me and Via before we left the house, since it was Via's first day of her new school too. Up until a few days before, we still weren't sure I would be going to school after all. After my tour of the school, Mum and Dad had reversed sides on whether I should go or not. Mum was now the one saying that I shouldn't go, and Dad was saying I should. Dad had told me he was really proud of how I'd handled myself with Julian and that I was turning into quite a strong man. And I heard him telling Mum that now he now thought that he had been right all along. But Mum could tell, I could tell, wasn't so sure anymore. When Dad told her that he and Via wanted to walk me to school today too, since it was on the way to the subway station, Mum seemed quite relieved that we'd all be going together, and I guess I was too. I don't know about you, but families are supposed to stick together. Now, if you are a big brother or sister, just remember that too. Stick together. Look after your little ones. Even though Beecher Prep is a primary school. Oh, preparatorial school. Anyway, prep is sometimes used for the name of a school. Even though Beecher Prep is just a few blocks from our house, I've only been on that block a couple of times before. In general, I try to avoid blocks where there are lots of kids roaming around because they're going to look at him. On our block, everyone knows me and I know everyone. I know every brick and every tree trunk and every crack in the sidewalk. I know Mrs. Grimaldi, the lady who's always sitting by her window, and the one guy who walks up and down the street whistling like a bird. I know the deli on the counter where Mum gets our bagels, and the waitress in the coffee shop who calls me honey and gives me lollipops whenever they see me. I love my neighbourhood of North River Heights, which is why it was strange to be walking down these blocks feeling like it was all new to me suddenly. Amsford Avenue, a street I've been down a million times, looked totally different for some reason, full of people I never saw before, waiting for buses and pushing strollers. We crossed and turned up Heights Place, and Via walked next to me like she usually does, and Mum and Dad were behind us, and as soon as we turned the corner, we saw all the kids in front of the school, hundreds of them talking to each other in little groups, laughing or standing with their parents who were talking to other parents. I kept my head way down. Everyone's is just as nervous as you, said Via in my ear. Just remember, it's everyone's first day of the new middle school, okay? What a good sister. Mr. Tushman was greeting students and parents in front of the school entrance. I have to admit, so far nothing bad had happened. I didn't catch anyone staring or even noticing. Only once did I look up and see some girls looking my way and whispering with their hands cupped over their mouth. That's not polite. But they looked away when they saw me notice them. We reached the front entrance. Okay, so this is it, big boy, said Dad, putting his hands on top of my shoulders. Have a great first day. I love you. I have a great first day and I love you, said Via, giving me a big kiss and a hug. You too, I said. I love you, Augie, said Dad, hugging me. Bye. Then Mum hugged me, but I could tell she was about to cry, which would have totally embarrassed me. So I gave her a fast, hard hug, turned and disappeared into school. It's always good to look at different people's points of view. And in this situation, there's 4 different points of view. It'd be interesting actually to stop and write down the different points of view from the different family members, sending Augie to his new school. Locks. New chapter, locks. I went straight to room 301 on the 3rd floor, and now I was glad I'd been on the little tour because I knew exactly where to go and didn't have to look up once. I noticed some kids were definitely staring at me now. I did the thing of pretending not to notice. I went inside the classroom and the teacher was writing on the chalkboard while all the kids were sitting at different desks. The desks were in a half circle facing the chalkboard, or in our case, a whiteboard. So I chose a desk in the middle towards the back, which I thought would make it harder for anyone to stare at me if I was in the back part. I kept my head way down, just looking up enough from under my bangs to see everyone's feet. Bangs are the hair to hair. In America, they call it bangs. In most countries, we call it a fringe. Looking under my bangs to see everyone's feet. As the desk started to fill up, I did notice that no one sat next to me. A couple of times someone was about to sit next to me and then changed his or her mind at the last minute and sat somewhere else. Hey, August! It was Charlotte giving me her little wave as she sat down at a desk in the front of the class. Why anyone would ever choose to sit at the front of the class, I don't know. He thinks that, people don't like other people being able to look at them. Suddenly someone was sitting next to me. It was Jack Will. Jack. What's up, he said, nodding at me. Hey, Jack, I answered, waving my hand, which I immediately wished I hadn't done because it felt kind of uncool. Okay, kids, okay, everyone settle down, said the teacher now facing us. She'd written her name, Miss Pentosa, on the chalkboard. Everyone find a seat, please. Come in, she said to a couple of kids who had just walked in the room. There's a seat there and right there. She hadn't noticed me yet. Now, the first thing I want to do is for everyone to stop talking. Oh, then she noticed me. Put your backpacks down and quieten down. She'd only hesitated for a millionth of a second, but I could tell the moment she saw me. Like I said, I'm used to that by now. So she looked, and then she didn't want to be embarrassed or make him feel awkward. So she looked away. I'm going to take attendance and I'm going to do the seating chart. Sitting on the edge of her desk, next to her were 3 neat rows of accordion folders. When I call your name, come up and I'll hand you a folder with your name on it, and it contains your class schedule, timetable, your combination lock for your locker, which you should not try and open until I tell you. Your locker number is written on your class schedule. Be forewarned that some of the lockers are not right outside this class, but down the hall. And before anyone even thinks of asking, no, you cannot switch lockers and you cannot switch locks. So imagine we've got our cubbies open, but if you're at a big school, they'd have and actually our school, if you're from UWC while you're watching this, they also have lockers in the middle school, and then you get a little padlock and you can lock your locker. They're a bit bigger than our cubbies. Then if there's time at the end of the period, we'll all go and get to know each other a little bit better. Okay? She picked up the clipboard on her desk and started reading the names. Okay, so Julian Albans, she said, looking up. Julian raised his hand and said here at the same time. Hi, Julian, she said, making a note on her seating chart. So everyone picked their own seats and she wrote down their names on a bit of paper so she could learn their names. Come on, pick it up, she said in a no-nonsense way. He got up and took it from her. Shamina Chin. She handed a folder to each kid as she read off their names. And she went down the list. I noticed that the seat next to me was the only one still empty, even though there were 2 kids sitting at one desk just a few seats away. When she called the name of one of them, a big kid named Henry Joplin, who already looked like a teenager, she said, "Henry, there's an empty desk right over there. Why don't you take a seat there, okay?" She handed him his folder and pointed to the desk next to mine. Although I didn't look at him directly, I could tell Henry did not want to move next to me, just by the way he dragged his backpack on the floor as he came over, like he was moving in slow motion. A lot of body language and a lot of our actions, not our words, but the way we move, the way we do things, the way we use our faces, can actually send a message to another person. And it can be really rude and offensive and also incredibly hurtful. So we need to be really careful. By Henry dragging his bag slowly over to Augie, Augie's automatically feeling uncomfortable and that Henry is scared of him or doesn't like him, has made a quick judgment before he even knows Augie. And he plopped his backpack open up really high on the right side of his desk, so it was kind of like a wall between me and his desk and mine. "Maya," said Mrs. Petosa. "Here." "Miles, here." I saw that boy, as he walked to his desk, shoot Henry a poor you look. "August Pullman," said Mrs. Petosa. "Here," I said quietly, and I raised my hand a bit. "Hi, August," she said, smiling at me very nicely when I went up to get my folder. I felt kind of like everyone's eyes were burning onto my back for a few seconds, and I stood in the front of the class, and everyone looked down when I walked back to my desk. I resisted spinning the combination when I sat down, even though everyone else was doing it, because she had specifically said not to. I was already pretty good at opening locks anyway, because I've used them on my bike. Henry kept trying to open his lock, but couldn't do it. He was getting frustrated and kind of swearing under his breath. Mrs. Petosa called up the next few names, and the last name was Jack Will. After she handed Jack his folder, she said, "Okay, so everyone, write your combinations down somewhere safe that you won't forget. Okay? But if you do forget, which happens at least 3.2 times per semester, Mrs. Garcia has a list of all the combination numbers. Go ahead, take your locks out of your folders and spend a couple of minutes practicing opening them. Though I know some of you went ahead and did that anyway." She was looking at Henry when she said that. "And in the meantime, I'll tell you guys a little something about myself. Then you guys can tell me about yourselves and we'll get to know each other. Sound good?" "Good." She smiled at everyone, though I felt like she was smiling at me the most. It wasn't a shiny smile like Miss Garcia's, but a normal smile, like she meant it. She looked very different from what I thought teachers were going to look like. I guess I thought she'd look like Mrs. Fowl from Jimmy Neutron, an old lady with a big bun on top of her head. But in fact, she looked exactly like Mon Mothma from Star Wars Episode 4. Haircut kind of like a boy's and a big white shirt, kind of like a tunic. She turned around and started writing on the chalkboard. Henry still couldn't get his lock open, and he was getting more and more frustrated every time someone else's popped their one open. He got really annoyed when I was able to open mine on the first try. The funny thing is, if he hadn't put his backpack between us, I most definitely would have offered to help him. Next chapter, Around the Room. Miss Petosa told us a little about who she was. It was boring stuff about where she originally came from and how she always wanted to teach, and that she left a job on Wall Street, which means she worked at banking or finance, about 6 years ago to pursue her dream and teach kids. She ended up asking if anyone had any questions, and of course Julian raised his hand. "Yes." She looked at the list and said, "Julian. That's cool about how you're pursuing your dream." "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said proudly. He's smarmy. He smarms up to people. "Okay, so why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Julian? Actually, here's what I want everyone to do. Think of 2 things you want other people to know about you. Actually, wait a minute. How many of you came from Beecher Lower School?" About half the kids raised their hands. Okay, so those people all know each other already, but the rest of you, I guess, are new to the school, right? So everyone think of 2 things you want other people to know about you. And if you know some of the other kids, try and think of things that they don't already know about you. Okay? Okay, so let's start with Julian, and then we'll go around the room. Okay, when you're ready. Okay, he said, the number one thing is that... Actually, do me a favor, start with your names. It'll help me remember. Okay. So my name is Julian, and the number one thing I'd like to tell everyone about myself is that I just got Battleground Mystic for my Wii. If you don't know what a Wii is, it's like PlayStation and things. And it's totally awesome. And the number two thing is that we got a ping pong table this summer. Very nice. I love ping pong, said the teacher. Does anyone have any questions for Julian? Is Battleground Mystic multiplayer or one player? Said a kid named Miles. Not those kind of questions, guys. Okay, so how about you? She pointed to Charlotte, probably because her desk was closest to the front. Okay, sure, said Charlotte, and she didn't even hesitate for a second, like she knew exactly what she wanted to say. My name is Charlotte, I have two sisters, and I just got a new puppy named Suki. We got her from an animal shelter, and she is so cute. That's great, Charlotte. Thank you, said Miss Petosa. Okay then, who's next? Now the next chapter is called Lamb to the Slaughter. I don't know if it's going to explain what that means, but think about a lamb going to the slaughterhouse to be killed for us to eat it. If you send a lamb to the slaughter, you're sending it to be killed, to be eaten. Like a lamb to the slaughter, something that you say to somebody who goes somewhere calmly, not knowing that something unpleasant is going to happen to them. I Googled it last night, and that's what I was thinking when Miss Petosa called my name, and suddenly it was my turn to talk. Hi, my name is August, I said. Yeah, and I kind of mumbled it. What? Said someone. Can you speak up, honey? Said the teacher. My name's August, I said louder, forcing myself to look up. I have a sister named Via and a dog named Daisy, and that's it. Wonderful, said Mrs. Petosa. Anyone have any questions? No one said anything. Okay, you're next, said Mrs. Petosa to Jack. Wait, I have a question for August, said Julian, raising his hand. Why do you have that tiny braid in the back of your hair? Like, is it like a Padawan thing? So he's got a little plait down his back. Yeah, I shrugged, nodding. What's a Padawan thing, says Mrs. Petosa, smiling at me. It's from Star Wars, said Julian. A Padawan is like a Jedi apprentice. Oh, interesting, said Mrs. Petosa, looking at me. So you're into Star Wars, August? I guess. I nodded, not looking up, because what I really wanted was to slide under my desk so no one would talk to me. Who's your favourite character, said Julian, who I was starting to think maybe wasn't so bad. Jango Fett, I said. What about Darth Sidious, he said. Do you like him? Now this is important that he said that. Okay, guys, you can talk about Star Wars stuff at recess, said Mrs. Petosa cheerfully. But let's keep going. We haven't heard from you yet, she said to Jack. Now it was Jack's turn to talk. But I admit I didn't hear a word. Maybe no one got the Darth Sidious thing, and maybe Julian didn't mean anything by it. But in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Darth Sidious's face gets burnt by Sith lightning and becomes totally deformed. His skin gets all shriveled up and his whole face just kind of melts. I peeked at Julian and he was looking at me. Yeah, he knew what he was saying. Nasty, nasty boy. What do you think of Julian?